Hi, G. Murray Thomas here, reading more excerpts from my caregiving memoir, Living the Sundown. Today's expert might be called The New Normal Times 2. First, a little trigger warning. This episode starts out sort of gross. But if you are a caregiver, you know that that's part of the job. That whoever you're caring for, whether they're elderly or have dementia or otherwise disabled, certain disgusting things are going to happen and you're just going to have to deal with them. So, into the story. That evening, our aide described my father's bowel movement as explosive diarrhea, which was primarily blood. After lying awake all night worrying that my father was bleeding out internally, I called his doctor in the morning and was told to go to the ER. So, back into the hospital. My father had just gotten out of the hospital about a week earlier for a different condition. When he was in the emergency room, lying on the bed, he suddenly became coherent and got out a few clear sentences, both in terms of vocalization and meaning. He told the doctor about his years making movies. "That was very good," he said. After a pause, he added, "But I can't do that anymore," and was quiet. Other than that moment, being back in the hospital did not agree with him. Since we took him in on a Friday, they admitted him over the weekend with an endoscopy scheduled for Monday. But long before that, he became incoherent, started hallucinating, and became extremely agitated every time he had to urinate. On Sunday, my sister and I got a visit from his doctor. He suggested that, rather than go through the endoscopy, which would likely make things even worse, we take him home and place him in hospice care. He explained that this meant we accepted that our father was in the end stages of Alzheimer's, which is considered a terminal disease. Our focus shouldn't be on prolonging his life, but on making sure he is as comfortable as possible for the time he had left. This suggestion surprised us, even shocked us. We didn't want to accept this situation. We knew it would come eventually, but weren't ready yet. My sister and I talked it over, and then called our brother to talk it over with him. In the end, the prospect of getting our father out of the hospital weighed as heavy as any other factor, and we agreed. We brought him home that night. That marked the beginning of the new normal for us. Home hospice care didn't really change much about how we cared for my father. It meant no more 5 a.m. runs to the hospital, and said seeing that he was comfortable whatever was happening. The main change was transferring his care to the hospice team. No more doctor's visits. A hospice nurse checked him once a week. She made major decisions, especially if he got dramatically worse. They also sent an extra aide, although we weren't sure what her role in his care was since she came in the middle of the afternoon when he was usually napping. The real difference was the attitude adjustment, accepting that he was in fact near the end of his life. It could be days or weeks or months, maybe even years, but the end was approaching. We needed to be ready. Although, in a sense, I had been preparing myself for this moment since I decided to leave California 2 years previous. But now it was no longer theoretical, it was the reality. At the same time, things were very different because he was different. Since he came home from the hospital, he was slowly shutting down. He only seemed half engaged with the world around him. When I could understand what he was trying to say, which was rare, it usually seemed completely unrelated to what was going on. More often, his sentences started out confused and then dribbled off into nothing. He was physically much frailer. He barely ate anything. Sometimes he could stand on his own. Sometimes he needed assistance. Sometimes he could walk on his own. Sometimes he needed his walker. Sometimes he needed a wheelchair. Sometimes he needed explicit instructions how to do something, as in, put your left hand here, your right hand here, now turn around. At times, he couldn't even follow those. Meanwhile, as my father went downhill, my mother actually got better. She became more alert, livelier, stronger. Most of the time, she had a good grasp of what was going on. She was walking much better. My feeling was that her mothering instincts had kicked in, someone needed caring for her, and that was her role. even if there's little she could actually do besides comforting him and encouraging him to eat more. It now seemed my father had accepted his fate. He had mostly stopped eating, he slept all day, he barely engaged with the world. He seemed to have stopped fighting. Of course, all this needs to be put in the context of COVID, the national new normal at the time, which is one of the weirdest things I had ever experienced. Ironically, it worked out okay for us because we weren't going anywhere anyway. My father was in no shape to leave the house, except for very short excursions. Most social situations would have been embarrassing because of his incoherence. But now we didn't have to decide whether to go to church because church was closed. Should we go to the theater over the weekend? No longer an option. The last time we went shopping, he almost got lost, so no more trips to the store for him. Okay.